So I'm doing a little bit of detective work. I'm looking at the marriage of my great-aunt Annie Glynn and Thomas Bryan. They got married on the 28th of November 1920, Thomas Bryan and Annie Glynn. 14 Henrietta Street, Dublin. So they actually lived in 14 Henrietta Street, where we went the other day to that museum. That's trippy. I wish I'd known that when I was there. Wow. Now it kind of takes on a whole nother sort of frequency.
George is returning to the tenement museum at 14 Henrietta Street, where he's discovered his great-uncle, Thomas Bryan, lived.
How are you? Welcome back to Henrietta Street.
Lovely cold weather.
Absolutely. Come through. So let me show you where Thomas Bryan and his family lived.
Very exciting.
He's meeting historian Kieran Wallace.
Come on through.
Oh. Is this the original?
This is the actual room where he...
Oh, man, that's
grew up.
amazing.
OK, it's been slightly redecorated for the purposes of the museum,
Yeah.
but this is the room, this is the view he would have had. So have you met Thomas and Annie?
No.
Let me introduce you.
Wow. He's a very handsome man.
Isn't he?
She looks quite fierce.
Do you think?
Yeah. She had good taste, Annie.
So Annie and Thomas would have lived in this space, in this room. This was their home as they set out on their married life as a young couple.
I've got a lot of questions, obviously, because it's such an interesting contradiction, the fact that my great-grandfather, Richard, fought in the British Army, and then you got this young, handsome whippersnapper coming into your family with quite radical views, you know. That's going to be interesting.
For Richard, with his background, yeah. Come on, I've got a few more things to show you.
What I'm interested in is, I don't know anything about Thomas Bryan prior to him meeting my great-aunt.
Well, I have a document here that might give you some background as to who he was.
Mountjoy Prison. Wow. Thomas Bryan. He was 1917, so 1917, 18, 19, 20. So he was in prison 3 years before he married Annie. He's an electrician.
So that's quite a good job at the time for a guy from this area. He's got a trade.
14 Henrietta Street.
Yep. So this is what he's charged with, his offence.
Okay. Acted in contravention of Regulation 9E of the Defence of the Realm Reg by taking part in a certain drill of a military nature. So basically he was pretending to be a soldier?
Well, pretending is an interesting word. So he's rounded up in 1917 for taking part in a drill of the Irish Volunteers.
Are the Irish Volunteers the IRA?
They're the precursor to the IRA.
Okay.
So we have to step back a bit to understand how he comes to be here to the 1916 Rising. Have you heard of the Rising? OK.
The Easter Rising in 1916 saw Irish Republican rebels launch an armed campaign in Dublin to bring an end to British rule. Although the British quickly put down the Rising, when they then decided to execute its leaders, the public mood swung behind the Republican movement, especially among young men like Thomas Bryan.
So Thomas grew up in this area where there was suddenly a really brutal set of killings of civilians during the 1916 Rising, and this would have radicalised him and many other guys like him.
Okay.
And they thought, right, it falls to us now as the younger men of the city to do something. So they were forming a secret army, which was the Irish Volunteers, out in fields in the countryside, and that's how he was picked up and arrested.
Amazing.
And that's who he is by the time he meets and marries Annie.
She definitely went for a bad boy.
She went for a bad-
That seems to be a family tradition. It's amazing.
They're married in 1920.
Yeah.
And you think, well, here's the happy ever after. This is what happens next.
Secret evidence at Drumcondra. On the 21st of the 1st, 1921, Thomas Bryan was found with 1 revolver and 20 rounds of ammunition. Francis Flood also.
So this relates to an incident in Drumcondra, which is a suburb about a mile north from here. At Drumcondra, there's a bridge across the river, and this is a unit of IRA men who's waiting behind the balustrade of the bridge to attack a police lorry that's coming past. This is during the Irish War of Independence, so things have really heated up in the city and in the country entirely.
The Irish War of Independence began when the Republican Sinn Féin party formed a breakaway government in January 1919 and declared independence from Britain. The Irish volunteers that Thomas Bryan had joined now became the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. It launched a guerrilla campaign in Ireland, and the British responded by imposing martial law. This meant being arrested could have serious consequences for an IRA volunteer like Thomas Bryan.
And this event goes horribly wrong.
The raid actually goes ahead, it happens. Nobody's killed on the police lorry, but it keeps going. But within moments, the other battalion of police arrive and they start to capture and chase after the IRA unit, and they round up most of them.
Does he go to prison for this?
He's arrested on this very serious charge and he's taken to Kilmainham jail.
And this is where things get very serious
Very
for
serious,
Thomas
yeah.
Bryan. It's amazing to think that my great-aunt Annie marries Thomas Bryan, and within 4 months he's arrested on very, very serious charges and he's in prison. And her future must have seemed so uncertain at that point, but I imagine that she knew what she was getting involved in. Maybe that's what attracted her to Thomas, you know, his passion. He was a very handsome man. For me, this is really interesting because, you know, when I was a kid, I used to play this album of Rebel songs, and being here, you know, and it's like climbing into those songs, you know. And, you know, it's interesting because I became a musician, and music's such a big part of my life. It is my life. So it just feels like I'm climbing into a piece of really important kind of not only family history, but also Irish history, you know, and that just feels kind of incredible.